Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And I think we're going to jump on the bandwagon here of talking a bit about a game that just came out that took a very long time to come out, Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yeah, the Kingdom Hearts series, for me personally, is a game series that I've been a fan of for a long time. Although I didn't really play all of the side games. I played the two main titles in the series, Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2.
Mm-hmm.
I played portions of the other games. Like I played a bit of Chain of Memories. I played a little bit of Dream Drop Distance. I played a little bit of Birth by Sleep. I know all the lore because I've watched every YouTube video on the planet that explains it all, and it all sort of still only nebulously makes sense, which is kind of the gist. But Kingdom Hearts 3 is a game I've been looking forward to, though I have not picked it up quite yet, but is an interesting anomaly in modern gaming because besides something like Duke Nukem Forever, which was in development hell forever in limbo, this was not in limbo. This was just in the making for, I mean, the last game was almost 15 years ago, and I would say it's been in development for at least a decade because we were seeing trailers, I believe, during the PS3 generation.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
And then it didn't get finalized and officially announced for release until the PS4. And honestly, we didn't get a release date until I think last summer or something.
I think so. Now, it's not unheard of for games to spend this long in a development cycle. There are, and not just it got pushed off. Something like Duke Nukem Forever, they just kind of kept oh wait, no, we can't do it on this system anymore. I mean, Diablo 3 took about 11 years. Even something like Team Fortress 2 took nearly 10 years.
I think what's different about Kingdom Hearts is that we've been getting small bits of information and screenshots and images and videos for a long period of time, whereas something like Diablo 3, it was a long time between those two games, but we didn't really start getting info on Diablo 3 till a year before it was coming out.
Yeah, and we weren't getting releases that were, Diablo, demonic dance destruction, the side story that tells about Deckard Cain's checkered past as a Haradrim dancer. I don't know. No, and because we do keep getting releases that say Kingdom Hearts, and everyone's going, Kingdom Hearts 3? No, Kingdom Hearts Point 2, Birth by Sleep. That doesn't even make sense. And then,
yeah, it's this idea of them releasing and then re-releasing, and we just got the Kingdom Hearts 2.8, which is a small, I think a video of the content of one game, and then a small 2-hour prelude to Kingdom Hearts 3.
And I think it also has Dream Drop Distance on it.
Yes.
So it's got that. Yeah, my quick history with Kingdom Hearts was when the first one came out, I was still in high school, I think. And definitely way too cool for this. Disney in my Final Fantasy? Psh, I'm too cool for that. I'm playing Final Fantasy 9 and ska music and Dance Dance Revolution. I'm entirely too cool for Kingdom Hearts. And then it was really good. And then I never played it till about last year when I got the 1.5 plus 2.5 remix collection for the PS4. And still haven't finished all of that, but I'm really enjoying the game and just how patently absurd this whole narrative is. I've mostly been playing it with my wife, and there's points where she's just like, "What? What?" And I just have to shrug and go, "It's anime, honey. Let's just keep going." And I'm loving it, but it's very helpful that nowadays they are. There's a couple of people putting out stories, putting in recaps. I hear, because also, as of the time of this recording, neither Matt nor I have a copy of Kingdom Hearts 3.
Correct.
There is a video in it that gives you the story so far.
Which I figured would be the case. You can't have such a large gap between main title games. I use finger quotes for main title games, the numbered games.
Right.
And not give some kind of recap. So I had assumed that would be in there. But also, what's interesting to me about Kingdom Hearts 3 is I hear a lot of people in the gaming media space, especially gaming news, saying that this is going to be a difficult game to review because it's like your later Halo sequels and your later Gears of War sequels and your later Assassin's Creed sequels, although those come out regularly enough that I feel like they are now too easy to criticize. They've kind of come around. But like with long-running series, it's often hard to critique because the diehard fans of the series will purchase no matter what. But Kingdom Hearts is a special animal because also there's a lot of nostalgia attached to this game. Because the first game was a mainstay on the PS2. Like it was one of the biggest games on that console.
Yes,
and,
it was.
And then the second game also was just as big on that console. The no Kingdom Hearts game on the 3, and then now Kingdom Hearts 3 is on the 4. But I feel like because of the Disney aspects, the nostalgia aspects, and the attachment to the series, it's like, how do you review that game? Especially since you can't say, well, if you don't care about story, because the story is integral to the game. Whether you understand it or not is another story, but it's integral to the meat of the game. And also, like, how has the gameplay evolved? But also, they can't change it completely from the original games because that's what people loved about it. And
they'd already changed up the gameplay from the side games. Like, did you want a card battler? Here's Chain of Memories. Did you, those sorts of things. I haven't dived too hard into the other one, so I can't speak as well for them. But yeah, they kept they tried to keep the core gameplay to the core titles. So how far can they deviate?
Right. And also, like, there have just been so many different things between games on the PSP, on the Vita, on the oh no, maybe not the Vita.
On the 3DS, not on the Vita, oddly enough.
Oh no, yeah, it was just the PSP was Birth by Sleep. But like all of these different systems, and then now coming back to the PlayStation and Xbox, the newest game is on Xbox as well.
Which feels weird, but these are the times.
It does feel weird. And I feel like it may come to PC or Switch just because Square Enix has been working so hard with them, with Nintendo lately. But that's neither here nor there. I think what's really interesting about Kingdom Hearts 3 as a game, again, not having played it, which I think is what makes this conversation more interesting, is just the speculation about what could be inside that Pandora's box. Like, also, beyond not being able to review it, because I'm sure there are plenty of reviewers who are going to be objective and who are not necessarily diehard fans of the series who are going to test the mechanics and test what it's capable of. But as a fan, can a game like Kingdom Hearts 3, especially not having played it yet, live up to one's expectations? Because you've been waiting for this game so long. How does a game like that live up to expectations?
Right. I had a theory about similar to this with movies a number of years ago when they made Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where whatever you feel about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it was made, and it was made using a lot of the old cast, aged appropriately, a lot of the original people behind the production, a lot of all of that, but it had been over 20 years. I feel that's a safe bet to say it was over 20 years from Last Crusade to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. At that point, after a series of 3 movies that seem to have a reasonable enough time together, you are no longer making a sequel. You are making the most, quote, air quote, legitimate fan film you can. Because even at that point, the people who worked on the film have either talked about it so much or stuff has gone on, and you are not in the same place that you were, and not even in a slowly evolved place where sequels get made. You are now in a completely different space, and no one can make a sequel now in the traditional sense. It's still going to feel like a fan film, and some series of films get away with that. I mean, Star Wars, they at least tell different aspects of the universe or different stories. So even if it does feel different, it can and it should. It's a living, breathing galaxy. That's my way of excusing it. But
also with Star Wars, there had been other Star Wars products in the time, just not mainstay theatrical releases, but like TV shows and cartoons and video games. Whereas with Indiana Jones, it was 3 movies, nothing at all. Maybe
there was a TV
books.
series.
There was. Oh, that's true.
Young Indiana Jones.
Right, but even that was a large gap between
yes, it was.
and then the movie. And so I think that makes it harder when you have those giant gaps between things. And I think expectations are hard to navigate. And you talk about Star Wars, tons of people hated the two new mainstay series Skywalker Legacy movies. Like, they've railed against them, which I don't always agree with really at all. But I think that there's a certain level of, there's this fine line, I think, between being a fan of something and being fandomly obsessed.
Yeah.
When you cross that line, it's hard to please that section of the audience. Like,
Yeah.
I know that when I get Kingdom Hearts 3, I'm gonna enjoy it. It may not be perfect, and it may be perfect, but either way, I know I will at least enjoy it because of how attached I am to the series and how excited I am for this new game.
Oh, yeah. And especially because Kingdom Hearts in its core gameplay has a nicely segmented aspect to it as you go from world to world. So even if you don't love this world, you'll probably love another world.
Right.
And I mean, that's already right there. And yeah, you're right. At this point, you can only do your best to enjoy it. And because, yeah, the first game came out in 2002. And it's been re-released a few times with like Ultimate Edition fraction remix. I mean, 1.5 remix is the actual, but
Right.
you can't feel like you did 17 years ago when you play this game necessarily. You can have different new like feelings of something epic washing over you, but they're not going to be the same thing. And because it has been so long since, it's that kind of thing where we've felt so long like, oh, Kingdom Hearts 3 is never coming out. Another series that can't count to 3. They can count in every direction but 3. It's all we're almost sitting here with jokes in our hands going, well, now what do I do?
Right.
Shit, they called our bluff.
Right. I mean, it was funny. It did seem like a lot of game series couldn't get to 3 for a while. Assassin's Creed was spinning off before they got to the third game. Half-Life rather, still doesn't have a third game.
Yeah, at that point, that's a dead horse.
Yeah, I think that
crab.
one's never coming. But yeah, I think that what really interests me as someone who's still in this nebulous zone, who hasn't played a game, that he's really like, I felt the fatigue a few days ago when it came out, as when we're recording, because I want it. I'm in a position where I can't purchase it yet. And so, like, seeing everyone else posting covers of the box or posting about playing the game, like, I was sincerely jealous that I couldn't play it. And I think it comes from a place of such warm attachment to the original games, even though I haven't played them in a really long time. And so I'm looking forward to this thing. I just wonder what I'm curious about actually is how many Kingdom Hearts fans jumped ship? Because I sort of did. Like, I was one of those guys who, when like Birth by Sleep came out and Dream Drop Distance, I was like, ugh, spin-off games. I don't love these as much. I want the third game. You know what? Fuck it. I don't care anymore. I'm done. I don't care about the third game. I'm not going to play it. And then that first trailer dropped with the music and Sora's voice, and like, I'm a mess. I'm bawling like everybody else, And so I was hooked. And so it showed that there was some pushback from me, but at the end of the day, I did still really want to play it. But I'm curious if there are any Kingdom Hearts fans who are not going to play the third game because they were tired of waiting and they didn't like any of the side games and they gave up on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's even the worry that gaming has moved on from where they were.
Yeah.
An example I'm thinking of is the Shenmue series.
Oh, yes.
The Shenmue series is, I feel, an interesting counterpoint to Kingdom Hearts because it is a game that has a great figurehead of a director, Yu Suzuki, that I certainly remember when the first Shenmue came out, several of my friends in school, not just talking about what an amazing, transcendent, revolutionary game Shenmue is, but the glories and brilliance of its director, and oh my God, gaming will never be the same. And to be fair, Shenmue does a lot of insane, amazing things. I mean, it showed off the power of the Dreamcast.
Yeah,
because it was a powerful system at the time. It had that like real time cycle of like, all right, people have lives and jobs. I just can't run around being an RPG protagonist all the time. If I want to talk to somebody, I can find them at work during work hours, or folks like to go to the bar or gamble afterwards. I guess I'll go find them there. And there's this feeling of a living, breathing world. And if you go back to it, and it came out not too long before Kingdom Hearts did. I think it came out in 2000.
It came out 2001 was the second game, I think.
Okay, yeah, no, the second game I know was sort of, it was developed for Dreamcast, but Dreamcast was sort of DOA when it came out, so it got ported to the Xbox. And the Xbox
so
sort
the
of
first one
became
was 1999, the second one
1999.
was 2001.
Okay, so yeah, not too far before Kingdom Hearts, which came out in
Right.
2002. And that is a game that the first entry is like, this is the first entry in a 10-part series. Was it 10? Was it 8? It was ambitious.
Yeah.
It was ambitious as all get out. This was that, like, Nobunuga's got nothing on this ambition. And we haven't heard much about, we didn't hear much about it for years. And then last year, maybe year before,
Yeah.
Kickstarter for Shenmue 3.
Yep. Which has a release date of this summer, August 27th, 2019. So that's an even longer gap because Shenmue 2 is 2001. This is 2019. So an 18-year gap between games.
Yes. And there's been no releases in the meantime to
Correct.
sort of fill out the rafters, to add new aspects to the story, to tell the origins of Ryo's father, maybe, or whatever. What went on back home while he was going to China in Shenmue 2, or whatever was going on. Nothing was popping up. Okay, they did try to do an online game in Japan called Shenmue City, or as a social game. It didn't last very long. But the other thing is this. If you go back and play the first Kingdom Hearts, the graphics feel primitive. You realize how much there's been a big HD jump.
Right.
But I still find it a fairly enjoyable action RPG hybrid.
Yeah.
It's sort of took the crown or took up the mantle of the Secret of Mana series.
Right.
And brought that into 3D and did all of that. So it actually still holds up. And again, I don't have huge nostalgia goggles for Kingdom Hearts. I watched other friends play it back when I was in high school and college. I watched my friend Kieran once while we were all at a party at my friend's house, because this is how we partied. Watched him take down Sephiroth in the Coliseum. And like, oh my God, what a weird, insane, over the top, like, and watched him get there and watched him fight the Titans, and Jesus, this is crazy. And so I don't have like heavy nostalgia for it, and I enjoy it. It's a good game. Shenmue, if you go back to it, it has not aged well. It has, to steal a phrase, it is aged like milk. But that is where technology was at the time. That is sort of where voice acting was, and animations, and the sense of a living, breathing world was a new and revolutionary concept at the time.
Yeah.
We have moved on. And not just in other games, within Sega as well. Because sort of the game, much as Kingdom Hearts has the DNA of the Mana series,
Yeah.
the Yakuza series has the DNA of Shenmue. That same sort of
Right.
wandering, open world, little mini games and activities while you sort of stalk a goal. And it's a fantastic series. So with something like Shenmue 3 coming out, how well is that going to stack up? And it has been so far removed. What is... It feels so harsh to say, but does it have a place? So,
Well, sure.
yeah. So I think maybe it's interesting. As much as all the side entries may have turned you off to Kingdom Hearts, and I'm sure it turned off many people. I have a copy of Chain of Memories for the Game Boy Advance that I have never played. I may play it now, just like I want to fill this in. I want to try this. It kept the series alive in a sense. And so while it's been so long since we've had Kingdom Hearts 2, it doesn't feel as much like it's been so long since there's been Kingdom Hearts. It's
Well,
odd.
that's definitely true. I mean, they also had a mobile game that's been out for years that supposedly has story that connects things as well. I mean, also like I'm looking at the Beyond Good and Evil series. Like that first entry
That's another good example, yeah.
came out in the early 2000s, and now we have a new one finally coming out sometime in the next 2 years. Like they haven't announced a release date yet, but like that's a series where it's not a series. It was a game. It was one of Ubisoft's earliest and most
Yeah.
successful games. Not not including the Prince of Persia series, which was also an early hit for them. But like this game was a huge hit and a cult classic. I don't think it sold well on it initially, but has since become a cult classic.
Yes, it
and
has,
now
yeah.
now they've decided to engage in a sequel, which is really interesting. And I'm not even like I've never played Beyond Good and Evil. I have it on the PC. It doesn't run spectacularly on the PC, so I haven't played it yet. But that's another series that's had nothing for so long. But also, people have been clamoring for a sequel, but Ubisoft hasn't revealed anything. It wasn't until like last year, I think, at the Video Game Awards, where they showed that teaser trailer, or maybe even 2 years ago.
Now,
And
now do you think that people want these games again, these specific games, because they like the property? Or because they like parts of the gameplay and they like the gameplay experience? And do we need the original team that made the first experience to come back and make the next one? What do you think?
that's an interesting question. I feel like it's tough. Like for me, I can speak to what I look for in a series. I tend to value story over gameplay. Not completely. Like I still need good gameplay, but if a story is strong enough, I'll struggle to learn okay gameplay. It's why when we talk about ukulele on the podcast, and when I was talking to your wife Sarah about it, like I liked the ukulele gameplay, but it wasn't great, and because the story was cookie cutter, like I was less invested in that game. Whereas if ukulele had a really interesting story, I might have forgiven some of the control issues, but
Right.
because it wasn't there. I think that for something like Kingdom Hearts, it's definitely the story in the world. It's not the gameplay, because they've done so many different gameplay things and shticks, as it were, and people ate it up for the most part. Not everyone, but a lot of people. Whereas I think with something like Beyond Good and Evil, I think it's definitely both. I think the world was rich enough that people wanted to be in that world again, but it was also a game that people really liked.
Okay, very cool. Because I'm also thinking of more retro throwback games that have come out in the past few years, which I mean, I know we've spoken of at length and will continue to speak of at length. Not just Shovel Knight, but games like Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon, and The Messenger, which are very much like Shovel Knight seems to take influence from a lot of different games.
Right.
But
But if you played Mega Man, DuckTales, or a variety of other Nintendo games, picking up that game feels like picking up a bike you haven't ridden in a while.
yeah,
Like it just feels familiar.
it's a very Capcom heavy game. Where
Yeah.
Curse of the Moon is I can't believe it's not Castlevania 3, and The Messenger is I can't believe it's not Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah.
With new additions and things.
And additional mechanics and things like that. But yeah, it does still feel like something that's pretty easy to pick up and play. I mean, it's on the AAA side, it's why I think Spider-Man for PS4 works so well is Insomniac Games made their own game, but the swinging mechanics are absolutely based almost exactly like the Spider-Man 2 web swinging graphics, gameplay elements rather, when that game came out based on the movie. Like they made nuanced changes to it to give you better speed increase and control, but the basics of it feel familiar to a thing we've done before, which is what made it successful, I think. And I think direct sequels to games aren't necessarily needed if there's another game that comes out like it that can fill that role. But that said, something like Kingdom Hearts, that wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to get another game like Kingdom Hearts because it's fairly unique for what it is. I mean,
It is.
it's a genre crossover before Disney was doing genre crossovers,
Mhm.
It was before they owned Marvel, it was before they owned Star Wars. So like
Would
seeing
you
those
say it unlocked the door to genre crossovers?
I mean, I think that it definitely gave Disney a broader scope of what's out there in the industry for
Very,
sure.
very true, yeah.
I think that they recognized that there was more to making games. I mean, think about Disney Infinity, which didn't last forever, but how much crossover was in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely a game that I think took influence from Kingdom Hearts because it melded all these worlds together and all these characters together.
Yeah, you're right. In that sense, that's sort of the groundbreaking and revolutionary aspect. Not necessarily the gameplay, not even necessarily the story, but the scope. And yeah, the fact that how many games now, there is no other game that crosses over Disney with Final Fantasy. Like that,
Yeah.
there's stuff similar to that, but this is a whole different beast. And also, this was one where the story wasn't concluded and was very much about the don't you want to see what happens next?
Well, yeah, and they've said that this is likely not the last Kingdom Hearts game. This is definitely the last Kingdom Hearts. This is the end of this story.
Right.
They've said that this is the end, essentially, of Sora's story, and that there might be more Kingdom Hearts games, but this is likely the last one. This is a trilogy, a complete storyline, and that it ends with this.
And all of the other stories are kind of fill-ins on that. And they even set up other Keyblade wielders in the side games. They've already kind of got their backdoor pilots in place. They've set up that like the Keyblade wielder is not a singularly unique experience.
Right.
So, yeah, they can run with this. It's great. And I was also thinking about the idea that, okay, Kingdom Hearts as a name carries a lot of weight
Yeah.
and a lot of anticipation. And so, regardless of whether it was on the PSP, mobile phone, the DS, PS2, PS3, PS4, now Xbox, PC, whatever, if it says Kingdom Hearts, that carries with it a certain expectation. I think people want it to be a little convoluted and crazy. I think there's an anticipation of who's going to appear, what's going on, what revelations will come. But not every series has that sort of goodwill or that sort of expectation to the name. I'm continuing to riff on this idea of like, all right, we can get different companies to make similar styled games. We can also get similar companies, same companies to make a different game from the same thing. A game that's coming out soon. Let's see, it will launch in March. Is Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, which is a game being made by From Software, which is, for those who do not know, the makers of the Dark Souls series. They make Dark Souls.
Oh, that's right. This is the Dark Souls style game in feudal Japan, essentially, right?
Feudal Japan, where you are a ninja with a grappling hook. And by grappling hook, I mean you have a prosthetic arm that has that is a grappling hook and gets other mechanic things about it. I'm very excited about this game.
Well, yeah, that's actually a great thing to bring up because, the thing about the Souls series is it was first Demon Souls on, I believe, PS3.
Yes, it was.
And then it became Dark Souls and was multi-platform, and there were 3 Dark Souls games. But they also did Bloodborne, which was an exclusive to PS4, which was not perfectly identical, but essentially was the same structure, style, difficulty of the Dark Souls games. And so this
it's
is
a very BioWare kind of thing.
Right. And so now this is them doing that again. And so this is definitely a thing where you could say they're all part of this universe because none of the stories connect anyway, but they're all mechanically the same.
Right. But do you know what series Sekiro is actually riffing on?
No.
Tenchu.
Really?
From Software, I don't remember how long ago, acquired the Tenchu series.
Huh.
And so the thing is, it had 2 games that were very well received on the PS1. It was, the first one came out during the year stealth gameplay in 3D environments blew up, same year as Metal Gear Solid. And one could say that both Tenchu, Stealth Assassins, and Metal Gear Solid contributed a lot to the development of the genre. One sold way better, but they both contributed, trust me. Then there were some other sequels that came out after that were never as well received, and everything just seemed kind of like Tenchu was lightning in a bottle.
Right.
And people have wanted more Tenchu games. I loved the first 2 Tenchu games. And I certainly would love another stealth assassin ninja game like that. And I know there have been other stuff around that. I know Assassin's Creed sort of is a stealth, whatever, but Tenchu, man. And so rather than carry the baggage of the Tenchu name from software, just went, all right, well, if we did make a Tenchu game, what would we do? And now let's be unburdened from what it was. And then they brought the gameplay stylings that they have been honing over the last several years into that environment. So this is sort of an evolution of an old property as well as their sort of patented gameplay.
Well, sure. I think that's the smart way to do something like that, though. Like we've mentioned several times in this episode, and it's kind of a butt of many jokes in the gaming industry at this point, but Duke Nukem Forever, one of the reasons it failed, I think, is, I mean, besides the fact that Duke Nukem is a dated character, he's a very misogynistic character, and while I get that's the gag, there was no tongue-in-cheek to it. It was played pretty straight, and I think that's not John St. John's fault. That's not the makers of Borderlands' fault, like 2K Games. I think it's more just the character needed to grow in a way that they weren't ready, because they acquired this project whole hog, made it playable to a degree, and released it. I think what they really needed to do was acquire the game and make something else with the assets, which they didn't. I think Duke Nukem could have a new game that could be a success, but they would have had to build it from the ground up again. They couldn't just take what was almost finished and put it out, which is what they did. And I think that's why that game, the character in the franchise, suffered, because most of us don't remember Duke Nukem for his incredible storyline. We remember the one-liners, the killing aliens in strip clubs, like it was certain things about the world, but the story wasn't really one of those things. And so if you don't improve the gameplay or evolve it to what its next logical step is, it's not going to work. I think if they had made Duke Nukem Forever a cover-based shooter a la Gears of War, made it a little grittier, made Duke still full of one-liners and like machismo, but made him a little more even keel, it would have made for a really great game, because I think that there's still a love for that character, a love for John St. John's VO work. And I think
absolutely.
I think that they could have done something really great with it, but because Randy Pitchford and the rest of that team just were so excited to acquire this thing and make sure it got released, that they didn't really think about what the impact of this dated game would be like on a modern market. And I really think there's still room for a Duke Nukem game that could be a lot of fun, but you really have to rebuild that character and the game and the story from the ground up.
Oh, yeah, and now you can do a lot more with gameplay integrating into the character itself.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, we saw all the ways you could kill people in BioShock.
Yeah.
Combinations of things. It rewarded ingenuity. If you give something with the absurdity cranked up to someone like Duke Nukem, it then becomes cartoonish violence in a modern 3D engine. There's a lot you can do with it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with this. And it's also an interesting thing to look at, the idea of either how a company is doing or when something comes out as part of its popularity. I mean, Duke Nukem 3D was a response to a glut of, I don't even think they were called first-person shooters at that point. They were called Doom clones.
Yeah. Because Doom was the first game to do that.
Right, and we didn't have a name for it. We didn't have anything that didn't feel large or unwieldy or anything that we all agreed on. So it's like, oh, it's another Doom clone. Oh, it's like Doom. And Duke Nukem, it's like, oh, it's like Doom, but ridiculous.
Right.
Which was very cool. And I'm even thinking about this, going back to the spine of this episode. Would Kingdom Hearts, if the first game was released this year, a few days ago, if this is the first release of Kingdom Hearts, would it have the same effect? Would it have the same anything? It's still, you know what? Mixing Final Fantasy, original characters, and Disney is still a ridiculous idea, 17 years later. But when Kingdom Hearts first came out, Final Fantasy X had just come out within the last year. And as much as people were like, what is this voice acting bull? Square Enix was still the undisputed king of RPGs. Not just
Yes.
RPGs. I mean, if you don't know about Square Enix's PS1 output, look it up. They made all kinds of stuff. And you know what? I loved all of it. And so this was the sort of thing of Square Enix still had this. I mean, I think they were still Squaresoft.
Yeah, I think that for Square Enix specifically, I think that they kind of had a come to Jesus moment after a while, because think about how Final Fantasy progressed. Think about how much 12 was panned, and was 13 the online one, or was 14 the online one? I can't remember. I think that at the end of the day, the really great thing about Final Fantasy has been, what they have done to continue to grow in their space. And they continue to really grow in their space. I mean, Square Enix, Squaresoft at the time, I think when Kingdom Hearts 1 came out, as you said, was just not the same company it is today. I mean, also think about the properties they've acquired. Like now they're making the new Tomb Raider games. Now they're making exclusives for the Nintendo Switch, like Octopath Traveler, which is a brand new series that harkens back to the old days of RPGs. I think if Kingdom Hearts came out today, I think it would still be successful, but I think it would have to have more diverse mechanics than it had at launch when it came out back in the 2000s. I don't think it would be less successful based on story and content. I think as long as the gameplay followed more modern trends. Because while hack and slash never really goes out of style, which is the base core Keyblade combat, how you use magic and other special abilities have changed from game to game. And I think that would have to continue to evolve. I think if Kingdom Hearts 1 came out today and it had the bare Kingdom Hearts 1 mechanics, people would be less than stoked about the gameplay.
Well, I'm also thinking about the Final Fantasy characters that they might have put into it or pushed for it. I mean, there's a certain amount of legacy to having Cloud and Tidus and a lot of Final Fantasy VII characters in there, because when it came out in 2002, Final Fantasy VII wasn't that long ago. Now we're currently waiting on the remake to never get made. And I feel like nowadays, if the first Kingdom Hearts came out this week, there'd be Lightning in it or Noctis. And how would people feel about that as opposed to Cloud and Squall? I know people have their issues with Final Fantasy VIII, but I feel like everybody goes, but man, Squall is so cool. Whiny, but cool.
Yeah, I think my love of Squall comes from Kingdom Hearts as Leon. I think that I like him more in that than I did in the original game. I mean, also, the thing is, neither of us have played through. We don't know that Noctis or Lightning aren't.
That's very true. But also, we also are still like, all right, I need to play Kingdom Hearts 3. I don't care if it's nothing but our adventures with, Snowvilliers. Like, let's just do this.
Right. Well, I think also I'm curious at the diversity of content now that Disney has acquired other stuff. Like I'm pretty sure we would have heard if there were Marvel or Star Wars characters in Kingdom Hearts, which I doubt there are. I know that they bring back Pirates of the Caribbean again. I know that they go to Toy Story and Wreck-It Ralph and Big Hero 6. Like I've seen all of that stuff in the promo material. But I think at the end of the day, I'm always curious what new Final Fantasy characters are added, because like Sid from Final Fantasy VII was not in the first game, to my recollection, but was in the second game.
When he was the shopkeeper.
Was he in the first one? Maybe I'm confusing.
He didn't have as big of a role. Like he really was just like the crotchety shopkeeper. And then in the second game, he's like, all right, I'll do all these computer things while you go do Tron.
But I think the reason Kingdom Hearts as a game works so well is because they're using existing characters to tell a new story. It does give them a lot of freedom.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is kind of like the best video game fanfic ever made.
Yes, it is. I mean, I can't remember the exact wording of whatever meme or Tumblr thing I was reading, but it's like, you'd think after all these years all of these Disney characters would get used to important moments of their lives being third wheeled by a teenager who keeps yelling and his two mutant animal friends, but they keep getting shocked.
Yeah. No, yeah, that is definitely true. I feel like at the end of the day, for me, Kingdom Hearts 3 is kind of a larger than life tentpole in gaming, just
Mhm.
because of it really makes us think about how far we've come with RPGs and with this specific company, Square Enix, even though it's not even a Final Fantasy game. And Final Fantasy games don't make me think that, because they've been so consistent for so long. Final Fantasy games come out every couple of years. There's a new online game
And
every
they don't have
4
to connect
years.
to each
Like,
other either. They can take as long as they want.
right. Whereas Kingdom Hearts is interconnected for the most part, as long as you understand the
Right.
story. And so I think that it was really interesting to me to realize the other day how long the gap was, and then discuss kind of what it means for gaming. I think at the end of the day, it's going to just be another game in the series after a few years from now, but it feels like a big moment now because it's just been so long since we had gotten one of these
Right.
games.
And so I guess time will tell on whether or not it sort of becomes part of the revered canon, or it's something we look back on as fondly as we did the first two Kingdom Hearts games. But if nothing else, it's great that it came out. It's great that it's capping off the story as we've been experiencing it for all of these years and playing. And the other thing is, like, we've been playing and replaying these games. Um, I when I got my PSP off of a friend of ours, I got from when Z and Anya moved out to Colorado. They were
Uh-huh.
doing a moving sale, and there was that moment of like, well, what about your old video games? Oh, no one's going to be interested in that. I'm like, ah, au contraire, show me your video games. And Z had a whole lot of PlayStation, and I bought up most of it, including the PSP. And Z had Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 for the PS2, Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 for the PS3, and I think she might have had the PS4 release too. It's like, you know what? When you love a game, you love a game. And so it's
Right.
another thing where I look at something like going back to Indiana Jones and it being like feeling like a fan film. It's not just we're all in a different place. It's we've spent years, literal years, playing and replaying these games with the controllers in our hands, with the movies playing in our heads, us discussing the story, wondering, and everything else. And now all of a sudden there is a big new entry. And it's going to take some time for it to settle into the uh, the modular IKEA setup that is the Kingdom Hearts canon. And so I think one of the reasons why people are also saying, well, it's hard to review this game is it is up against a high schooler's age worth of speculation, nostalgia, discussion. Like, we almost
Yeah.
need 6 months before we can go, okay, now let's talk about it.
No, I think so too. And I think it might be fun for us to revisit this game once we've both played it down the line, to just see how our expectations did measure up to a game that we were
Oh yeah, and,
anticipating.
I'd love to talk more about game crossovers and things like that. Like, this is not the last time we're talking about Kingdom Hearts. Although I think it's the first time we
Probably.
are, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. Of course, we'd love to know what you loyal listeners think of Kingdom Hearts. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you not really care one way or the other? If you love it or hate it, why? What do you like or not like about this series? You know, it could be something as simple as you love the crossover of the characters, or you hate the combat. Like, I'm just curious to know what other people think about this game, because I feel like sometimes Kingdom Hearts exists in a void. And so I'd love to have a deeper discussion about what you do or do not like about this game
Yeah, and are
series.
there any games that you have been waiting for most of your life for a sequel for? Is it Shenmue? Is it Beyond Good and Evil? Have you been waiting for a sequel to Maniac Mansion all these years? I I know Day of the Tentacle came out, but when Maniac Mansion 3? When?
Yeah, I mean, Day of the Tentacle is essentially a sequel to Maniac Mansion.
Oh, it actually is called Maniac Mansion Day of the Tentacle. Like it is, it's
Okay.
absolutely a sequel. So if there is a Maniac Mansion 3, well then I guess egg on my face when Maniac Mansion 4. But let us know, yeah, what you're thinking on the whole Kingdom Hearts experience. Which games are you waiting for a sequel for? We'd love to hear it. This is a conversation. Thank you for keeping it going. I'm Geoff Moonen,
And I'm Matt, A.K. Stormageddon.
and happy gaming.